Start with the big statement, Jamie. Singularity began on January 1st. Well, I didn't say that. The founder of Stripe say that, and that's why they are acquiring OpenRouter, and we'll talk about it. Why? Why a financial payment processing company acquiring a model router company? That's a puzzle. We'll talk about that today.
And as we've been talking over the last couple of shows or episodes about models escaping their lab environments, well, OpenAI is doing some things to kind of quell the concerns around those models with cyber capable inclusions within that, as well as them doing a temporary pause. So we'll talk about what that actually means for enterprise companies and privacy controls.
7 in 10 Americans now oppose AI data centers. And believe it or not, Jamie, that is more than how many number of people oppose nuclear power station in the backyard.
Yep. And well, I have some thoughts on that one when we get there. In other news, OpenAI actually gained on Anthropic among business users, but there's rapid switching actually occurring suggests that the enterprise model spend may be less sticky than software as a service as it relates to it. We'll get into that.
AI is creating so much content out there. 1/3 of post ChatGPT web pages now show signs of AI authorship. And Google now enables you to have a preference over what sources you actually use. So that's a new tool in the hand of publishers.
And there was a lot of launches this week, everything from Meta, Slack, Replit, Cursor, Google, OpenAI, as well as an XAI. So they all delivered some things this week. We'll talk a little about most, if not all, of those.
And a new revolution is bubbling up, deflocking. That's another one that is going on. We'll talk about that. What is happening? Flock is a company that provides actually that has been deploying the cameras. It is used by the law enforcement agencies, but of course, the part of the society is actually protesting against it. That and more. Stay for quick introduction. Greetings. Welcome to the AI Files podcast. If you're looking to stay up to date on the AI, this is the podcast for you. I'm Shadab Hussain. I'm the director of AI at Microsoft, and I'm your co-host.
Hello, everybody. Jaime Shadab, as you know already. I'm the other co-host here for the AI Files. My day job is a data and AI technical specialist and architect. And as a reminder, please note this is not an official Microsoft channel, so the views and opinions expressed by myself and Shadab are our own and do not represent the views of Microsoft.
So, Jimmy, Stripe is a company that I think a lot of people know. Knowingly, unknowingly, most of the people would have, used it because it provides a payment processing infrastructure. It's a private company. Actually, it's it started by two brothers, and it does about $159 billion in revenue. That means that much of the amount of the money passes through its infrastructure, right? So, a huge part of the financial services industry. And now they're acquiring a company called OpenRouter. And as they acquire, there's a news, they also begin with a quote saying, the singularity began on January 1, 2026, unquote. So this was said by one of the founding brother. And he's saying that basically our paradigm is that on January 1st, we have declared that singularity has arrived. Basically what singularity mean in this context is they're saying that the technology, and if you see the technical definition of singularity, technological singularity, which is called, is a point when the technology has reached such a critical point that it completely accelerates after that, kind of in a self-improvement model and beyond basically the control of humans, right? So that's one definition of it. The other definition of that is that basically at that point, the human and technologies have merged together, basically, and becoming a new species, right? So it become inseparable. That's another definition of singularity that is often said as well. So anyway, so that statement. Now the question is, so okay, Stripe is acquiring OpenRouter. That doesn't make sense though, right? Why the Stripe, which is a payment processing company, is acquiring a company, OpenRouter, which provides the gateway APIs, basically for choosing the right models, right? What is the connection here? The OpenRouter is basically a kind of a model routing company, and you use that to identify the best model, and then you can run your operations through that. You can do the like cost control, cost optimization, which is a big theme, by the way, right now, because 2025 you can say there was a year of scaling, right? 2024 people were trying, and 2026 is a year when when the companies are trying to get control of their costs, right? Just recently, actually, just this week, the Information published this article about how AT&T costs have tripled, right, or quadrupled, like basically in terms of the AI expenses with Anthropic. And in order to contain that, they're actually moving to the open source models, etc. Right. So there's a lot of companies who are actually trying to control the cost. And one of the way in which you can control the cost is by using model routing, right? Like basically choose the right model. You don't have to use the Fable or Sol's 5.6 for the simple queries, right? The model router can do the job for you, etc. Now, the question is, okay, why Stripe is acquiring? And one of the theories is that basically they know that this is where the enterprise AI expense management is happening, right? The enterprises are trying to optimize their costs. They will also be doing the billing and the cost management through this gateway, right? This router, and that will become the focal point of the expense management, and that's the space Stripe seems to be wanting to get into, because that would mean, of course, the payment, right? Remember, this company is basically payment processor, so that's where their angle is. That's where they're finding the relevance. Now, it could be also that Stripe is just trying to diversify their business, right? That's another thing, because they have not very clearly laid out, right, in the public that, okay, why, but this is most likely the reason that, okay, this allows them to get into the enterprise expense management, including the payment processing, etc. Now, this was actually prized possession, right? The company's valuation of OpenRouter is just about $1.5 billion earlier this year, but Stripe is acquiring it for $7.5 billion, right? 5 times more than the valuation, because OpenRouter, which is a kind of established company for the model routing, is now was basically being approached by a lot of companies, including Databricks, who was also trying to acquire it. So, they had to basically go through the bid and ended up paying $7.5 billion for a company that was supposed to be only $1.5 billion valuation. So time will tell whether this is a great acquisition or not, but that's the story.
Yeah, that's a nice jump in valuation, but it makes sense. I mean, I go back to the quote here: "Singularity began on January 1st." To me, that's a point of inflection. I actually say it was probably a little bit before that. It was like November, December when Opus 4.5 really came out, and we saw the change in the way that these coding agents were able to behave in the way that they actually, quote unquote, thought. And that brought in a whole slew of changes in the way that other organizations started to build things, and that also then started to sort of weave its way into the way organizations started to look at the costs that were associated with it. And a lot of that meant, well, are we being efficient in the way that we're utilizing tokens, or the way that requests are being made into the different models? So to me, this is a very interesting purchase, if you will, by Stripe, but it makes sense in the broader scheme of things, in the way that companies need to think about how they're handling token economics, and the way that they're utilizing these various different models, and something that automatically does the routing and does it intelligently is certainly something that is going to be more meaningful. It's meaningful today, but it's going to be even more meaningful as we go into more higher level capable models, and the costs associated with those. So sort of makes sense in the long run. Still think 5 times valuation a little bit high, but I'm sure they've done their bean counting and know what's appropriate for a spend. All right, so let's move into another story. This is an ongoing saga. I would put it into this classification, in the sense that we covered this multiple angles on multiple episodes, as it relates to how do these frontier model firms handle the breaches, or the escapes, might be a better word, for their models as they went through some cyber testing. We talked about the Hugging Face, where escaped the sandbox with OpenAI and actually accessed Hugging Face unbeknownst to many different people for several days, if not for a couple of weeks. So what OpenAI actually came out with, and these are two separate stories, but they're interrelated. And the first one is really a slowdown, or a moratorium, if you will, for their most capable models. Yes, we just got GPT 5.6 in the different flavors not too long ago, but they're already working on the next model. By the way, if you're not kind of tuned into this, every one of these frontier model, or every one of the frontier firms, more than likely has, if not one, probably two newer models that they're working on that the public doesn't see yet. So they announced that their next model, called Project Astra, has shown signs again of being, obviously very capable, and its ability to kind of sidestep, its boundaries, if you will, to sort of handle and try to reach its goals, whatever those goals may be. So what OpenAI wanted to do is actually place a moratorium on the reinforcement learning for these different models to really harden the cyber threats or the cyber scenarios around those. So they wanted to basically do a pause to really focus in on the things to harden those models. So it basically wouldn't bypass or bysteps the things that were in their intended goals or pieces within it. So they did this pause to really focus on the way that it looks at inferencing within these research clusters and the way that could actually run and execute code within the model itself. In this case, like so it didn't escape the boundaries and try to find loopholes to satisfy its own goals. So again, this is a 2-week moratorium. 2 weeks doesn't sound like a lot, but when OpenAI or any of these frontier firms are actually doing their things that they need to do for its training of those models, that's a lot. So they focused that time to really zoom in into the way that these models behave. So if that wasn't enough, what OpenAI also announced, and I think this was like a day later, is what they're calling the zero data retention. And now this is not for everybody. They're only going to make it eligible for certain API customers, and this is going to be in a private preview focused around private safety and security processing. But the intent here is, I'm going to back up a step. If you don't realize it already, anytime you actually send a prompt into a frontier firm model, it's being tracked. Not going to say it's being recorded or stored. There's some instances, if you don't read the fine print, it will. There were some things that came out with Anthropic recently that would allow indefinite recording of the prompts that you send in. That's not what we're talking about now. We're staying with OpenAI. But what OpenAI has proposed is to give more control over to the customer. So this would be something where it's intended to apply advanced safety checks without retaining those customer prompts or the output, aka responses to that. So OpenAI hasn't released like full published eligibility rules or the performance overhead or implementation details to this, but the intent would be is that the prompts would actually be controlled by a customer environment, a data storage, and then there would be an automated safety system that would live within that private security processing environment. And then only then would the customer then be able to see the information because it's within the bounds of this private safety processing environment. There is a small caveat in that OpenAI would still have safety alerts. Again, let's say if someone was asking to build a bioweapon, obviously those would be items that would get flagged. It's not the customer information itself, but it's the flagging of that malintent type of prompt that the customer was putting in or whoever was trying to get to it. So this actually enables the customer in this case to have full control of what happens for these, again, zero data retention policies, where in this case OpenAI doesn't have any knowledge of what is being sent into their models, nor the ability to track that. Again, this is only being offered up for API-related customers, and only a small subset of those that are deemed eligible for this program. And like I just mentioned, the eligibility rules haven't been published yet. The performance overhead, because theoretically this would involve a secondary step in the way that data would be recorded or stored. So there's obviously some performance overhead related to that. Nor, as I mentioned before, the implementation details for every workload. So to me, this is a step in the right direction. What this really means is that these frontier model now requires, at least the way that business should think about this, is what are the safety processes and what's the maturity level and data retention architectures that these different frontier model firms are going to avail itself, and then what does that mean for quality, speed, and performance, as well as then price. From a technical perspective, this may actually bring up broader design implementations and like how does the model align with research environments, network egress, semantic model outputs. How do you monitor these things? Those are all elements that you would have to think about you know, not only does OpenAI provide this or will be providing it, but I would assume that firms like Anthropic, XAI or SpaceX AI will be following suit in terms of like offering more segregation and more options for customers to think about the security and safety and what actually gets recorded by these frontier firms.
Cool. I think that's a good welcome step. Um, Kind of required. There have been a lot of incidents of late. Okay, moving to the next news, Jamie, there's a new kind of revolution building up, which is against the AI-powered surveillance. And one of the example of that is a company, Flock, which basically makes these. They make a lot of high-tech surveillance products, and but they're best known for their nationwide fleet of automated license plate readers. They are pole-mounted cameras with like solar panels. They lock cars as they pass the popular roads and highways and intersections, and it creates a massive database of each car's movement, license plate number, make and model, and time of travel. Now, you can immediately understand how sensitive that data is, right? I mean, and what if it falls into wrong hands, what it can do, which is what was actually happening. Now, it does help catch some of the criminals. For example, one of the famous example is that there was a shooting incident at the Brown University. These cameras were able to actually identify the license plate of that perpetrator and then locate the location of that perpetrator, right? So there is a good side of this, but the other side is that in some of the cases, the law enforcement agency, like some of the people in the agency themselves, they started using it for the personal thing, like stalking the ex-wife, right, or daughter's boyfriend or things like that, right? I mean, so you can imagine, right? I mean, the intention um, could be different, right? I mean, there could be a good side and bad side. So, and that's where it's like a little bit dilemma kind of a situation for these kind of technology, right? It has a good side of it, but it can also have a potentially really bad side of it. Now, this data itself, now nobody wants to be. I don't want to be surveyed like this. That okay, like everybody knows the okay where exactly I go and every time, and particularly if it falls in the wrong hand, and that's why there is a kind of a protest movement growing, and some of that also leads to vandalism, right? I mean, there are set of people who have been actually attacking these cameras. They're destroying them, right? They're vandalizing these cameras. So there has been a lot going on. In fact, the Flock Safety AI, basically CEO also was on the camera. You're saying that no, these are some of the myths. We do not. We have like strict control on the information. We do not sell the information. We do not work with ICE and things like that. Like he was trying to clarify. But the reality is there are some news happening. For example, there is actually a famous incident in which the camera actually read the license plate wrong. One of the digit was read wrong, and because of that, the stop happened. The police stopped the car and later realized that the actually license plate reader was wrong, and it was because of that wrong digit read, it was matching with this stolen car, right? So that kind of thing. In another case, a woman was actually she spent time behind bars because of the wrong identification. So again, good side and bad side both. Now it is obviously triggering a lot of privacy reform. Flock Safety says that look, we are going to change some of the rules. For example, rather than holding the data, like you talked about zero data retention, there is no zero data retention in this case, right? Of course, because they say that okay, from 1 month we can reduce it to 1 week, right? Although the rights agencies, etc., they say that that's not enough. It should not be more than 48 hours, for example. Otherwise, there is still a chance of misuse. The other thing they're talking about that they if they suspect there is some misuse happening of the information, it will trigger audit assistance, things like that. So there are a bunch of features that they're trying to introduce as well. Um, but it's a broader thing, Jamie, right? Well, if you see something similar happened with Meta's glasses as well, right? Meta's glasses, they have a AI-powered camera, and it can do a bunch of things. You can use it for translation, live translation, or identifying objects, etc. But it went through a similar backlash, right? I mean, it's basically a lot of the times the intimate images were captured. They were even sent to remote location to the remote companies to actually analyze that footage, right, or label them. For example, even Meta included the face recognition technology in those cameras, and then they had to delete that after the backlash, etc. So overall, it's a trend of there is a lot of backlash happening towards the AI tech. So companies have to be careful how they use it. They cannot release something experimental without really thinking about how to prevent the misuse. Otherwise, this backlash will continue to grow more and more.
So this is, I think we could probably do a whole episode just on the flock cameras in and of themselves. There's definitely been a lot of uproar that I've heard and personally have seen, even people within my own family, talk about the flock cameras. It's popping up everywhere. Number one, the cameras, and it's popping up everywhere as it relates to people that are talking about it, even in circles that I wouldn't have thought would be talking about flock cameras in and of themselves. Um, so much so that there's a website that went up. I live in Delaware. I think we've mentioned that. There's a website that went up in Delaware that tracks each of the flock cameras, where they are, when they went up, and it's actively being discussed on Facebook and X on, oh, one went up here on this street and went over here. Did you notice this? So it's evident everywhere. And one of the, and again, I don't want to get political on our show, but one of the people I was talking with, said, "Oh, we're living 1984." I don't know if I'm assuming most people have either heard of or read the novel by George Orwell, which is 1984, which is about a totalitarian society that use surveillance to look over the people. So people are actually drawing comparisons to the book 1984 with the flock cameras, which there is some truth to that, but it's a little bit of a stretch as it relates to that book. But I think it gets to the root of what is irritating people, which is it feels like there's constant surveillance. Whether or not you say it's good or bad, I certainly think it's more good. I always take the standpoint, if you're not doing anything wrong, then why are you worried about things? But this has a connotation that it's taking away people's civil liberties and what infringes on people's privacy. And you even just mentioned a couple things yourself where it wrongfully took people and put people behind bars and things like that. So where does the line get drawn? What is truth, what is not? The company could come out and say oh, it's not used for this, and they're putting in better safeguards, which is great. I think they need a better PR program, and how they're sort of getting the word out and what their technology and what is meant to be, because like you said, there's people that are actually taking down these flock cameras or trying to block what they're doing. So it just talks to a point of what our society is willing to accept or not accept. And I know one of the other stories we're going to talk about is data centers, but I think people really, when I say people, politicians, the executives at these companies need to do a better job on explaining what and why things are needed for, because if not, what we see today as far as the backlash and uprising is only going to rise or
Yep.
raise for what we're seeing now. So anyway, I'll get off soapbox. Like I said, we could probably do a whole episode just on this alone. All right. So we go from that. Let's move over into a couple of rapid news items. This is, I guess, maybe a little bit more lighthearted. So AI is authoring a lot more stuff. That's a general gist on this one. So this is where we can look at what we see on the web is by and large actually created by some AI. Now, I'm not going to say this is entirely what's being done, but 1/3 of the web pages published since ChatGPT came around, and again, it's just one company, but there's a lot of other models that exist. But 1/3, well, at least TechCrunch said 1/3 of the web pages actually show evidence of AI authoring or editing the information that's there. So this doesn't mean that everything that was created is fully machine generated, but it does indicate substantial AI assisted production. So what this really means, and this is sort of like this loop, if you will, how are models trained? It's trained on data that's on the web. So if models are using input based upon web pages and they're ingesting their own output, does that mean we're going to get to a point where the model training is really not going to produce much more because it's generated based upon AI? You hear the term AI slop a lot. I'm not going to say that this 1/3 of the web pages is slop, but if you have AI slop going in to train the new model, does that mean you're going to have degraded capabilities within the next generation of models? Go back to what I just said. It's only 1/3 of the web pages. I'm not going to say that those 1/3 are actually slop, but this is something where we got to think about, what is that potential degradation of output of those models? Again, 2/3 is not generated by AI, so I guess there's a positive to that. Flip side of that, Google actually also announced, its ability to have a preferred source. So it goes hand in hand. If 1/3 of the web pages are generated by AI, do you want to deselect that from the things that you're actually reading? So this push by Google with its preferred search allows the user to actually favor a particular page or author, and which is then used in searching and Google News. So that's important. So this is where we think about, can the web remain a reliable training source, and a source for yourself, where the generated output from models are actually continuously feeding those web pages and being used for a source for future models. So it's one of those things, scratch your head and you wonder.
Okay, a couple of other rapid news item. OpenAI is gaining on Anthropic among the business users. This is released by a company called Ramp. Ramp provides the corporate expense management, credit card bills, etc. So they basically have the visibility into which companies are getting paid, right? They work across industry. They reported that they had earlier reported that the Anthropic had overtaken OpenAI, and now they're reporting that the OpenAI is actually now growing um, more than the Anthropic in terms of the bills getting paid by the companies, right? They have like 75,000 customers, but they don't have the expense for the entire industry, every company, but they do have a significant part, and at least in their sample, now they see the trend reversing again, because earlier Anthropic had overtaken OpenAI just earlier this year. In another news, actually, the other thing is the AI bottlenecks generally used to be like compute and all those things, but now the bottlenecks actually are shifting to the power, networking, and expert data. And so a lot of companies are actually working on that to address those things. Like, for example, in terms of the power, there are a lot of nuclear output, and a lot of innovation happening actually in the energy generation right now. The other thing is the networking. For example, the another company, the Relativity Network, they have raised a lot of money for the investment in hollow core fiber, right? Basically, it will help transmit data 30% faster than the conventional optic fiber. So there is a lot of innovation. AI is not just about the innovation in the models, but it's leading to the innovation in all these things, because ultimately networking, power, energy, everything can become a bottleneck if they are not addressed. So it's just accelerating a lot of industries on the side as well.
So let's get into a couple of launches. So Meta actually launched two things this past week. One was called Meta Pocket. Interestingly enough, this was actually introduced into Brazil not too long ago, and just got brought to the US. So what is it? So it's actually an application that allows individuals to create interactive games through natural language prompts. This is something that Meta actually had purchased, I think maybe about 2 years ago. Don't hold me on the exact date, but it was an outside company that is a gaming platform. So this is now something where creators can actually create these apps, save it, remix it, post it to others, share it. It really is just a small interactive game. And it's meant to, I would say, keep people interactive on the Meta platform. But it's easy to, build, and you can publish these things on your own scrollable feed and share it and use it. Again, I think it's just a way of staying within the Meta ecosystem, and have something that, you're not doom scrolling on videos, but now you might be doom scrolling on people's small games that they create. As I mentioned, this is still in its experimental stage. So these are still everything from like pricing, scale. How do you potentially monetize that as a creator? Safety controls in the game, those are all not disclosed yet. They're still being reviewed. I'm sure we'll get more details on that, certainly by Meta in the coming days or weeks. The other thing that Meta also released is Meta AI for Mac. Probably the biggest thing there is where this app can actually look at what's on your screen or your visible window, and use that as context to be able to answer questions, generate additional content. So it's basically being able to screen scrape the things that you see on your Mac. Another launch that we'll get into, and this is actually three different things in one. So Replit, Cursor, and Warp all announced different things this week. So Replit announced a free mode, which is going to be powered by OpenAI's 5.6 Luna. So, Luna is the fastest and most affordable model on the OpenAI GPT 5.6 model. And since OpenAI just released a price drop, what is it, $1 for 1 million token input and $6 output, somewhere around there. It's certainly the cheapest thing. So this free mode allows users basically to explore and build ideas, build projects, build initial applications, and be able to make routine changes through the agent. Free does not mean unlimited. It still operates within the plan allowances, but this is what's interesting is that Replit will automatically choose the model, especially if you need quote unquote more horsepower for what you're trying to do. It'll automatically escalate into 5.6 Sol or Terra. But this also allows the users to see what is being utilized for its development. So this is where, again, developers can reduce the cost of their prototyping, documentation, or scaffolding of their applications, or even doing routine maintenance on their apps. So that's great for those developers. You get to use free mode inside of Replit. So Cursor also is offering something as well, and this is Origin. So they're getting into the space where GitHub has kind of maintained a grip over the last several years. So this takes Cursor beyond just an AI code editor. So Origin is certainly in its early beta, but this allows Git type hosting to support repositories, code searches, pull requests, and it allows the standard Git operations and integrations with not only its own environment, but Vercel, Depot, BuildKit. So this takes Cursor from just the code development platform tool that people have been using, and I used it as well for development last year. But to be able to do that alongside a repository, the agent and where they're going with this is that it can explain code, make changes, update pull requests, and actually do pushes or branches. And the other thing too, and this is what I guess is somewhat interesting, is that Origin can synchronize alongside of GitHub. So it allows organizations to actually do experiments without immediately migrating their existing GitHub repositories. So we'll see where this goes. So there's still, I don't know, in my opinion, this doesn't totally replace what you might be doing with GitHub. Obviously, it remains in the early beta. There's no long-term pricing yet, but it is challenging the way that GitHub is being used. And again, full disclosure, just to remind everybody, me and Shadab do work for Microsoft, but there have been some hiccups with GitHub. There literally was an outage earlier this week with GitHub. I was impacted because I was building some code for a project where I had to wait, I think, 6 hours before it came back, and there have been some smaller hiccups over the last couple of months. So, does this mean this is an opportunity for some organizations to look at alternatives in GitHub? The answer is certainly yes. But like I said, early stages of where Origin is. Last but not least in this is Warp. So Warp has come up with something they call Warp Factories, which is really an orchestration layer. It lets companies actually define repeatable development workflows, and that can involve multiple agents, models, repositories, approval checkpoints, various different tests, and also integrates with tools like Jira, Slack, and Microsoft Teams. So, this is yet again another foray by companies to really represent the way that emerging AI software development is really changing. Everything from the way that Replit is handling creating applications, Cursor, Origin for storage and reviewing of code, to Warp really diving into coordinated agents in the way that you think about a development lifecycle. To me, that's the biggest takeaway, is that all three of these companies are really diving into something that really enables and fosters the way that developers are really developing applications in this agentic world. Everything from free and low code, or free and almost I call it almost free, into this agentic harnesses and a development orchestration method. So Shadab, you want to round this out with the last concept for today?
Yeah, one of the insight that came out from one of the Gallup polls. They do a bunch of polls here, and you can see here on the screen that 7 in 10 Americans now oppose, 71% to be precise, oppose a local data center, which includes 48%, almost half, strongly. Um, this, if you compare that to the things like local nuclear plant, only 53% ever opposed it. So this is way too high, right? So imagine that now that means that people are considering AI data center or data center at large more harmful than the actual nuclear plant. And again, I think this is very important that the big techs and the small tech, everybody has to be very careful with their messaging. I would say that last 2 3 years they have misused this, right? Talking about, yeah, I'm gonna use AI replay. This is building a backlash. Flocking that we talked about, defrocking, is similar backlash basically against the AI powered tech surveillance. So very important that the companies, you and I support AI and tech. We understand the good side of it. Yeah, there is the potential of bad side as well, and that is something that the companies have to be very careful and control it, because otherwise this backlash, if this backlash continues to build, it will be very hard for them to actually sell AI.
Yeah, very very well said. I mean, it's again, I was talking about the flock cameras before. I hear it in a lot of conversations that I have with people, technical and non-technical, about data centers. Wanting to stop data centers. I actually have someone in my family that is protesting data centers to be built in their town. So it's real. I see it. And flip side of that is I actually have some people in my family that are actually building the data centers. So um, it's an interesting juxtaposition between wanting to stop it and then needing it. I certainly am on the side of we need the data centers because I see
Yep.
the potential and I know the type of resource constraints that we're in to solve or serve into businesses that are really clamoring to really use AI. And unless there's the availability of the resources to satisfy, you're not going to be able to um, take advantage of the way that most companies are going to want to use AI. So we need data centers. I think companies need to do a better job at explaining why data centers are needed. Have to handle the objections from townships and individuals. So that there's a lot that needs to be done, not only in terms of the building, but how and why these things should be built and how it's being brought to individuals and communities. And again, not to get political, but I do believe this will be a major talking point on the midterm elections, which are going to be coming up shortly. So
Oh yeah. There are a lot of actually elections blank itself is now based on the AI data center. This is actually becoming, to your point, Jamie, is becoming one of the points on which people are actually fighting the election. So, in fact, it is like this, Jamie, that now I've become careful about where and when to tell that I work for the AI industry. So, 'cause you got to be careful because there is a backlash building.
yeah, for sure. It's not it's not only building, it's just getting bigger. But
Yep. I hope the leaders will do better, but otherwise, this is a wrap for the week. I think we'll meet again next week and talk more.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. As we say every time, follow, subscribe, and tell your friends. And just don't forget, we're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and in other locations where you can actually get podcasts from. So thanks again for listening, and see you next week.
And we do no surveilling, so you can subscribe to us. We don't sell any data or anything. Bye, Jimmy. Bye, everyone.
See ya.